So some really interesting perspectives and learnings, and I think more lessons that we want to unpack. Um, I'll go with my first question, and this is a question for Enkama and for Rose. And so I'd love for each of you to talk a little bit about how women and youth in particular are exercising their voices to shape policies and to shape programs that are responsive to their needs. Obviously, looking at the context of Mongolia and Kenya, where each of you is working. So how do women and youth exercise their voice? How do they engage in policy? Um, how do they participate in some of the policy making?
When one looks at what the government is doing, it's like it's already taking up quite a lot of needs for women. And I'll say this because of the various affirmative platforms that have been brought up for women. As I indicated earlier, one of the platform that has been put up is what we call the Uwezo Fund. It's a Swahili word for enabling or giving the women some ability to diversify their activities from agriculture. Agriculture is where they are mainly employed, but of late agricultural productivity has gone down. And given that, in addition to that, women participation in labor force is lower than that for men, and the payments are also slightly lower as far as the Kenya Households Survey is concerned. So the aspect of diversifying the sources of revenue or sources of income have become very critical in enhancing sustainability and also the resilience at the household level. So what we find is that with this program, where women are tapping into resources that are cheaper, quite a lot have actually benefited. For example, one of the statistics that we have is that as many as almost 900,000 individual women have actually managed to tap into this Uwezo Fund, which is really tracking through groups. About 61,000 groups, women groups have benefited. And through this, they also get training as far as entrepreneurship is concerned, and they gain also some skills in terms of business management. Secondly, I would say that the Agricultural Finance Corporation, which I've said has this window for women affirmative action access window, is also a platform that women can exercise in terms of reducing one of the constraints they have for collateral because they don't own a lot of assets to get access to loans. Yeah.
And Kenya has a very large proportion of its population who are young people. And I assume that, you know, for the women in particular who are working on the front lines in agriculture, there's some considerations that are unique to them because they are representing the younger generation. Are there mechanisms for that perspective to come to the forefront?
I know that in the Ministry of Agriculture, there is one platform they are trying to use to promote youth participation in agriculture, but also through agribusiness to make it look, an attractive entrepreneur for them. So through promoting agribusiness, and at the moment also bringing in the technical institutions where they can be trained to participate more effectively in agriculture. This is one way that the youth are actually being attracted, but we also have a platform for youth fund so that they can access and be able to participate in various activities, including in agriculture. Yeah.
Enkama, would you like to comment on the engagement of youth and women in policy making?
As I mentioned, in a government organization, the women work 60% of the public servant is women. We have not a lot of programs, especially for genders. Yes, some of programs from the government implemented to address hunger and malnutrition also in the agriculture sector. Um, I would like to just highlight the very, very professional, capable person, woman, in the decision-making position we have to put. Yeah, that's our problem. Thank you.
So, Elan and Saika, each of you work on programs that are focused on accelerating progress on poverty reduction very specifically. You talked a little bit about what some of those programs look like. I'd love to hear why you think they work. What are the elements that have made these programs successful in capturing these vulnerable communities and making an impact on their lives, and where do you think they're falling short?
Well, as I said earlier, that we designed actually our poverty reduction program as a protection, as tools actually to attack the root of the poverty, but as well as actually to protect the poor and the vulnerables against the risks that can happen actually at different stage of life. So I think that's that way we think that can make sure that one, and second is actually with that the access to microloan, access to training as tools to improve actually the productivity of the poor. So we saw that actually that can uh, elevate actually the poor to the increase actually their welfare and then becoming non-poor. But we also see that again there are some areas that I think we need to improve as well, and this is particularly related with the programs that particularly address the vulnerable group like elderly and disability. So we have this program actually since a while ago, but we are aware that there's issues actually in I think in the effectiveness of the program in reaching better actually this vulnerable group. For example, like program elderly support and disability, while it has been actually under the management of the uh, Ministry of Social Affairs for I think a decade or even more, but they have the coverage of the program, the benefit of the program actually not really increase all the time. So this kind of issues that we think will prevent actually the programs to be effective. And if we look actually at the we looked at the data, we know that the poverty in Indonesia, one of the main characteristics is actually explained by the poor, the elderly poor. So with this characteristic, so we know that if we have actually a better coverage, the program of the elderly supports that have the better coverage, and the right benefit that can target actually this the vulnerable group. In this case, is actually elderly as well as disability. So we know that this can accelerate the effectively the poverty reduction, and that's what we are working now.
You know, this example of the elderly poor as a critical target, do you feel that, and from what you've seen in your country, by having programs that are targeting and focusing them, you're able to then capture some other vulnerable groups that benefit perhaps from the trickle over effect of the elderly poor focused programs?
Yes, I think The short answer is yes. But other than designing actually the program that specifically target this type of the vulnerabilities, elderly disabilities, we try also to equip the system with like mechanisms actually for the poor or the vulnerable group actually to be included in the system. As we know, I mean, our database, this is working to joint works actually between the government and the National Statistical Agency. Uh, Despite actually our continuous improvement on the data collection, but there are still some. We believe there's still some errors, and there's still some poor and vulnerable group that are excluded. So the way we improve actually the data is actually like provide like grievance as well as self-registration of the programs. So anyone that that they feel that they should suppose actually to receive the support from the government, but they're still outside, then they can actually enroll to the programs. So with that, we think that that somehow can address actually the exclusion and cover better the vulnerable and then the poor that is still out there.
What we think is that when we really want to leave no one behind, uh, the approach has to be very holistic, because even reaching people with certain interventions might help them up to some extent, but then they might be lacking. Like if we reach people with interventions that improve their economy or financial condition, but do not give enough behavior change communication support that actually helps them to improve better dietary habits, might not impact as good on ending hunger and malnutrition. So in BRAC, what we are doing is we are of course targeting by poverty, we are targeting by gender inequality. We're involving women more in our activities. There are ultra poor people who are not able to take microfinance benefits, so we target them separately. Then we are also giving microfinance and credit support to different other groups who can avail them, and also give them enough skills so that they have alternative livelihoods. You know, Bangladesh is mainly agricultural country, and most people are involved in farming, but it's also important to have other skills to go through the lean seasons. Otherwise it's very difficult for them to stay above the poverty level throughout the year. And also we are targeting the first 1,000 days, and not only the first 1,000 days of child's life, but also trying to start from adolescence, so that we have problem of early marriage, early pregnancy in our country, so that we can combat that, and then that will help to get better results. So of course in that way what we're trying to do is having a very comprehensive approach of targeting people in poverty and other vulnerable situations. Could be geographical vulnerability, could be economic, and trying to reach them with whatever what all different kind of interventions they need to get out of that condition, and can contribute better to their health and nutrition. And also keeping in mind the gender perspective, although we are heavily focusing on involving women, increasing women's empowerment, but also always trying to bring sensitize men to create an enabling environment, a supportive environment that helps women to actually progress. And yeah, I think that is how we have been working so far.
Thank you, Saika. Kadi, this question is for you. When you were speaking earlier in your intervention, you talked about, of course, your work being so focused on women and women in the agriculture sector, and you highlighted some serious challenges that prevent women in the agricultural sector from achieving their economic potential. You brought up land issues, you brought up access to finance, access to inputs. I'm curious, from your work, what kinds of actions need to emerge so that women are more actively part of the design process of the intervention so that they are reached more effectively. How do you bring them to the table if they're being overlooked in so many policy and social and cultural ways?
For our regional NGO, we're working to improve the economic situation for the women, representing 52% for the all West African population. We are many, but illiteracy is here, poverty is here. We are suffer to other sector without agriculture. All women go to agriculture to because food, as you know, women is handling the food for all the family. Is why they working no income is a big problem. The work for women no income, including in agriculture. What we have starting with some international community like ADB give to us award in 2014 because we working to food and agriculture maybe for all the sub-Saharan continent work we do it very well. And for FAO 2015 we have the medal for FAO because this work is why I'm very happy when I got your invitation to come to exchange what we can do better regarding the situation for the women in agriculture. For me, we need to have more investment. We need to have more mechanism to modernize what products for agriculture, what we need to have the new mechanisms like ISI to process food. Because when food is not enough, we have hunger in the population. We need to have machination to go fast and produce more for our population. And without this, FAO is for agriculture organized, but working with state only. NGO is really a complaint about what FAO need to do more, and we hope if we can highlight the situation, what women can do to make better the situation in Africa, especially in Africa, to push FAO to do more for the women. I'm very sorry for my English. It's just for summary my idea regarding this topic. I working there more than 50 years in Africa, and I'm very happy to come to Bangkok and learn from my colleague in this issue. Thank you so much.
Well, that's a perfect segue, actually, to opening the dialogue and the discussion from those on the floor. So, we'll take some questions, some ideas. Please keep them short and focused so we can get as many thoughts in as possible. State your name and the organization you're with.
Hi, my name is Pat McMahon from Mothers First. Just a couple of points. I think it's clear that you've identified women as being one of the furthest behind. But we've 15 years experience in the field, and we've taken it a little bit further. We created a hypothesis that it's the furthest behind will always be women when they're pregnant, and women when they're malnourished, and the unborn child. So we're forgetting the unborn aspect of it. So it's a way how to frame the design process of our interventions, because the furthest behind is very broad. But if we can, and like one of the panelists said, then you can break that down into poverty levels, so you can understand then it's going to be rural women. So it's just a way to frame. It's a way to frame who is the furthest behind, because I don't think we've identified that. So it's just a point for consideration.
We also have our presenters with us, so if there is any question on the presentations made earlier, you can also ask them.
Hi, Nancy Aborto from World Food Program Headquarters. Thank you very much to the panel and to the presenters. It was very, very interesting and important topic. I really appreciated, I think it was one of the presenters that said gender is not just women, gender is all genders. And then, Saka, you were talking about the importance of sensitizing men in women's empowerment. But I'm curious to get a little bit further down into the operational level with some examples of how do we get men engaged with the women's empowerment issue. I appreciate we have one man on the panel, but oftentimes you do see situations where it's women talking to other women. So if you could, any of you or the presenter, I'd appreciate any thoughts.
So I think I can also state Hazel's example, actually, that study was done in Bangladesh, is that when we are approaching women for nutrition or agriculture or any other support, so usually we give them skills or training and things like that. So for several projects we have tried that men they have to come as a couple to avail those services or support or training, and which makes a change. And in both lives, like in Bangladesh, is viewed that agriculture is predominantly work for men, and nutrition and anything regarding food is a predominant work for women. But then both of them, when they're coming to agriculture training and a nutrition counseling session, they see how they complement each other. So that is one way to bring them together to the trainings. There are different conditional cash transfer projects in Bangladesh. So nowadays, we're in most of the projects, the conditionality is that the husband and wife both has to come for the sessions. So these are some of the ways that you can bring them together and have those. And then again, there are individual sessions that can also be held with men to sensitize them to come to these sessions together. So I think, yeah, we have to talk to men more. That is the key point.
Just to add an example, in the project called Agricultural Nutrition Gender Linkages that's in Bangladesh, so this is a randomized controlled trial that's trying to combine agricultural productivity sort of interventions with nutrition interventions, and one of the treatment arms is around sensitization of men, and what they do is to sort of have community conversations, exactly like what how Saika described it. There are other projects that have done this type. This is an HKI curriculum, in fact, and so there's actually quite a number of experiences out there that are being evaluated. And I think what they're finding is that when you involve all the decision makers, so not just often we talk to the person without the agency, the woman, and expect that, oh, she knows how to feed her child and so it'll just happen. But no, there are other gatekeepers. There's the mother-in-law, there's the husband, and so they all need to kind of be part of that conversation. Thanks.
Oh, I'm Joyce Njoro from IFPRI. Yeah, so starting by thanking all the presenters and the panelists, and also appreciating what has been said by all. That, like, I think one of the messages was the importance of targeting and understanding that there are very many factors that may cause social exclusion, and these vary by context. Like, for example, the nutrition could also be one of the factors causing an exclusion, because the malnourished are more likely also to be excluded, like all those who are stunted. And also climate factors can also be factors of social inclusion, and poverty, and among others. And that the context could be different even within the same communities. So I think maybe a holistic social analysis or assessment would really be key to really understand then what underlying causes are we addressing through our projects. And I think one other thing maybe I would like to bring out is that beyond just understanding or the targeting, when it comes to implementation, to what extent are these maybe either women or the youth or the others taking a part in leading the implementation, Or do we see them just as beneficiaries, so waiting to benefit from the projects? To what level are they participating actively? And thinking about what tools and methodologies can we use to empower them so that they have a voice or they can make decisions on how the projects are being implemented. I think that would also be something good to also maybe consider. Then finally, when you talk about nutrition, agriculture, applying a gender lens or a nutrition lens to value chains would really be one way of identifying entry points or areas where we need to address from all the way from the inputs to the markets and to the consumption. That would be a very important way of seeing the entry points when it comes to interventions or even key indicators that we can use to track progress within agricultural programs. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Vanessa. I'm from Save the Children. Thank you so much. It was one of those moments where you feel like you picked the right session to come to. I found it really interesting. I've got two kind of comments and questions, but they're related. I was really pleased when our colleague from FAO said that reaching the most deprived is expensive and hard. And I think it's a really important point to stress. You know, we're doing some work in Bangladesh where really reaching the poorest, we've had to be so modest in terms of what we expect to achieve in terms of income, you know, taking people who have nothing to the point where they're able to be entrepreneurs, you know, and we have to accept that in terms of our own ambitions and what we promise to donors and to our accountability. But my other question was around really reaching the most deprived, and we often say we are, but we're not reaching the most deprived. When we talk about people like street children or domestic workers or sex workers or refugees or nomads or migrants, you know, really people who have nothing, don't know their rights, they're sometimes so impossible to even find, let alone work with. And I'd be so interested to hear any examples of where you feel that you've been able to do that successfully.
Thank you very much. I'm Eugene from Rwanda. I work for an organization called Rwanda Development Organization. My question goes to all panelists. We are progressively seeing women occupying a higher space in the political spheres. Like example from Mongolia, where I think 60%, if I got it right, have higher positions in leadership. But the gender disparities, the gap keeps widening. I fail to understand. Likewise, from my own country, Rwanda, I think it has the highest percentage of women in parliament. But the gender disparity keeps widening. What's the problem from your own perspectives?
Thank you. So we had two questions. I'll have one of you, two of you quickly respond to them. The first question is, does anybody have an example about what you're doing to capture the vulnerable who are not captured right now, who are overlooked in many ways, those who remain invisible, those who are voiceless? Anything that you're doing to get to those most vulnerable, voiceless audiences? And then, well, let's start with that one.
So yes, we have the database that we use actually to target actually the poor, and we use that as the database to generate actually the beneficiary lists for major social poverty anti-poverty programs. But yeah, this is the data that based on the household, and as you rightly said that these vulnerable people, they're mostly actually not stay in the household, so they're most likely actually to be excluded in database. So actually to addressing that, so we have like a parallel initiative to identify this vulnerable group. This is the initiative that is already been in the most under the Ministry of Social Affairs. We're now trying to put actually this initiative and integrating it into actually the database. So there'll be two main sources of the database. One that collected or enumerated by the National Statistical Office and will be the household base, but there are spatial identification for the vulnerable groups that look at the homeless, sex workers, street child, and so on. And while we yes the method will be spatial, unique compared to the regular enumeration for household survey, but the way we want to manage is actually will be integrated. So I think hope it's we're still developing it because even at the current stage, we think that while it is already been on the ground actually for a while, but we think that the collection, the database itself for these vulnerable groups can be improved. That can be improved much in the future.
Just to comment on the same, I would say that in Kenya we have a national social protection law now in place, and one of the key elements that the government is working very hard to deal with is, for example, with the elderly persons. And by 2017-2018, the program had registered about 310,000 elderly persons. The other thing that the government is doing under the social protection is enhancing registration or with the National Health Insurance Fund, yeah, which has now become mandatory for all school-going children. And this is to ensure that they can have access to healthcare at whatever point they can do in life. And the other aspect I would say is also for the persons with disability. There is an affirmative action through the procurement angle, where the government has set aside about 30% of government procurement for the people with disability. And all this is actually to put some money into their pocket, and they can have access to their basic needs. Yeah.
So in Bangladesh, we do have a social protection program that includes street kids, but then it's not at the scale that we reach 100% of the street children. And for the sex workers, we also have a tuberculosis control and screening of HIV/AIDS program, which also is coupled with other health and nutrition information. So there are programs, but of course, I think the issue is of the scale of reaching, even within that target, with reaching everyone, and also there is no, I think, such surveillance that that can capture any new person falling into that category. So of course there are initiatives that cover those the most vulnerable, the excluded ones, but we cannot say that we are reaching 100% of them with all kind of support.
The National Statistics Office of Mongolia conducts survey for the identification of vulnerable group every 2 years, together with the Ministry of Social Protection and Labor. The Ministry of Social Protection and Labor has data for those data on those persons. We provide these people with food card. Okay, thank you. Thank you.
Well, we are at time, although I'm sure our panelists are willing to stay and talk further. This was a huge topic, and I think incredibly complex to not only unpack, but also how do we figure out the path forward. I think a few very quick takeaways from my perspective is this idea of clarity and alignment is so critical, right? It was raised in the presentation, but we've been talking about this more broadly. So who are we talking about in terms of the most vulnerable? What are their realities? Who and what inspires and influences and empowers them? And then the alignment of programs, right? Alignment of programs and also monitoring efforts to not only meet their current needs, but also anticipate what's emerging. The other piece that really stood out for me is this idea that all people should be secure. And that's at the heart of the SDGs, that's at the heart of leaving no one behind. So in addition to programs that empower and bring and serve those who are vulnerable, perhaps not at the most marginal levels, but who are vulnerable, we also need to be very deliberate about capturing the groups that are falling between the cracks, you know, who, as our colleague has essentially highlighted, is perhaps not having voice, perhaps not having presence, and how do we reach them? And I think the other piece that we didn't have time here, but I want to highlight that is, I think, absolutely essential in terms of the inclusivity nature of bringing vulnerable communities to the forefront and helping them prosper. It's not just about the programs and the policies and the tools and techniques that we put in place and put out there. We also have to have this element of demand-driven efforts, of creating and enabling not only the outrage, but the pathways and the mechanisms so these audiences can, these targets can come to the forefront and take advantage not only of the services that are offered, but that they value them, that they embrace them, and they see that, you know what, I can realize my full potential, and I want to do that. So thank you all for coming. Thank you for our panelists. It's been a pleasure, and I think the next session starts in a few minutes.